The haunting. I never thought I'd end up working at a mortuary, but like a lot of people, I needed the money. Silver Pines Mortuary was just outside of town, and the pay was decent for what seemed like easy work, night shifts, watching over the place, doing some light cleaning, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It was always quiet, too quiet, which you'd expect in a place full of the dead. But quiet became eerie fast. I started there about 3 months ago, and for the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. I mean, as normal as a mortuary can get. The building was old enough that it had probably seen more bodies than the town itself. The kind of place with floors that creaked no matter where you stepped, flickering lights that never seemed to stay fixed, and a cold draft that came from nowhere in particular. It had a basement where they stored the bodies in refrigerated drawers, and even though I wasn't required to go down there often, I'd be lying if I said it didn't freak me out. One night, about a month in, I was working my usual shift. The place was dead silent, pun intended. I was doing some paperwork when I heard something. At first, it was faint, like a soft thud, coming from down the hall. I figured maybe the wind had knocked something over or that one of the old pipes had shifted. I didn't think much of it, but then it happened again, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the noise, my shoes echoing against the floor. The hallways were dimly lit, just enough to navigate without tripping over anything. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement, and I cursed under my breath. I hated going down there alone. The stairwell leading to the basement was narrow, and it always smelled damp, like the air had been trapped there for decades. As I descended, the temperature dropped. It was always colder in the basement, but this was different. It felt like I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath formed small clouds as I exhaled, and every instinct I had screamed at me to go back upstairs. But I had a job to do, so I pressed on. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the lights flickered once before going completely out. I sighed and pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. I scanned the room, moving toward the cold storage where we kept the bodies. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but then I noticed something strange. One of the drawers was slightly open. Now, these drawers are heavy and need to be locked shut to keep the bodies properly refrigerated. I know for a fact that I'd checked all of them earlier, and they were secure. My stomach dropped, and my hand shook as I approached the drawer. The air grew even colder, so much so that my fingers felt numb as I reached for the handle. I hesitated for a second before pulling it open. Inside was a body, of course. An older man who had passed away a few days ago. His pale skin was stretched tight over his bones, his lips a sickly shade of blue. He hadn't moved, but something about him felt off. His eyes, they were wide open, staring right at me. That didn't make any sense. When the body had been placed here, the eyes were closed. They always were. I slammed the drawer shut and backed away quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening for any other sounds. But all I could hear was my own shaky breathing. Then came the voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the cold air. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was coming from behind me. I whipped around, shining my flashlight toward the noise, but there was nothing there. Just an empty room. That's when I noticed the footsteps in the dust on the floor. Long, deep prints that hadn't been there before. They led from one of the other drawers straight toward the back of the room, and then stopped. Just stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I bolted upstairs without looking back, locked myself in the office, and tried to calm down. My mind raced with every logical explanation I could come up with. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe it was just my imagination, or the stress of the job catching up with me. I didn't sleep much after that night. I thought about quitting, but something kept me going back. Part of me needed to know what was really happening. I didn't talk to anyone about it, not even the other staff members. Most of them had been around a lot longer than me, and none of them seemed fazed by the place. 2 weeks later, I was working a double shift. It was late, around 3 a.m., when the power went out again. This time, I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the basement, figuring I'd check the breaker. But as soon as I stepped into the stairwell, I heard it again, that soft whispering, like someone muttering under their breath, just loud enough to hear, but not clear enough to understand. I stopped in my tracks, listening. The whispering got louder, coming from the cold storage. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep moving, my hand shaking as I held the flashlight. When I reached the basement, the temperature had dropped even further, and that familiar chill crept up my spine. I opened the cold storage door, shining my flashlight inside. This time, I didn't see anything out of place. All the drawers were shut, and there were no signs of movement. But that voice, it was still there, louder now, like someone standing right behind me, speaking into my ear. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight catching the corner of the room. And that's when I saw it. A figure, hunched and shadowy, standing just outside the circle of light. Its features were distorted, like someone trying to hide in the darkness. But I could see its eyes, wide and unblinking, watching me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me. My chest tightened, and I could barely breathe. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The basement was silent again, save for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I ran upstairs, locked the door behind me, and sat there until my shift ended. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me, anyway? But I wasn't the only one. A few weeks later, one of the other night shift workers quit abruptly. He didn't say why, just packed up and left without a word. I've heard rumors, though, whispers from some of the older employees about strange things happening in the mortuary at night. Things no one wanted to talk about. I've been here for 3 months now, and I still hear the whispers sometimes. I still feel the cold creeping up my spine. And every time I pass the basement door, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is watching me. Waiting. I don't know how much longer I can take it. The night shift. I wasn't always a night shift guy, but life has a way of pushing you into things you wouldn't normally choose. Hillcrest Mortuary isn't exactly the kind of place you dream of working at, but when the rent's due and you've got bills piling up, you take what you can get. My job was simple enough: make sure the place didn't burn down overnight, keep everything clean, and answer the occasional phone call from a grieving family member or a late-night delivery. The mortuary was quiet. Too quiet. I figured I could deal with that, until the weird stuff started happening. The first night passed by without much of an issue. Sure, the place had a vibe, but it's a mortuary. What do you expect? The smell of disinfectant and the cold air kind of got under your skin after a while, but I could handle it. At least that's what I thought. The second night was different. I was sitting at the front desk, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was just the old building creaking again, but this was different. It sounded like movement. A shuffle, almost, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I stood up, listening, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It seemed to be coming from the back hall where the cold storage was. That was weird. No one else should have been in the building. I was the only one on duty. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed toward the back, trying to stay calm. My mind raced, offering up all kinds of rational explanations. Maybe the door wasn't latched properly, or maybe there was a loose animal. Anything to keep me from thinking something was wrong. When I reached the cold storage door, I hesitated. The noise had stopped. Everything was silent again. Too silent. I pushed the door open slowly. The air inside was cold, colder than usual, even for a room meant to store bodies. My breath came out in foggy puffs, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of metal drawers where we kept the bodies. I could see all the drawers were shut, just as I'd left them. But something wasn't right. The room felt wrong. You know when you walk into a place and it just feels like you're not alone. That's how it felt, like the air was heavy, pressing down on me. And then I heard it, a soft tapping. It was faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned toward the source of the sound. The tapping grew louder, like someone lightly drumming their fingers against metal. It was coming from one of the drawers. I froze. My brain refused to process what was happening. There was no way anyone inside that drawer could be making that noise. Slowly, almost against my will, I moved toward the drawer. My hand was shaking as I reached for the handle. The tapping stopped the moment I touched the metal. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I pulled the drawer open. The light from my flashlight shone on the body inside, an older man, pale and still, just as I expected. He hadn't moved. He couldn't have. But something was wrong. His face, it was different. His eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling, and his mouth was twisted in a grotesque smile. My stomach churned. The dead don't smile. I slammed the drawer shut and backed out of the room, my heart racing. I told myself it was just some trick of the light, that I was tired, that I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The rest of that night, I stayed at the front desk, trying not to think about what I'd seen. The noises didn't stop, though. Every now and then, I'd hear the tapping again, faint and distant, like it was following me. The next few nights were quiet again, but the sense of unease never went away. I avoided the cold storage as much as possible. The thought of opening one of those drawers again made my skin crawl. A week later, things escalated. It was around 2 a.m. when the power went out. The whole building plunged into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the breaker in the basement. The hallway leading down there was narrow and always gave me the creeps, but that night it felt worse. The beam of my flashlight barely seemed to cut through the darkness, like the shadows were thicker than they should have been. When I reached the basement, the air was freezing. It was hard to breathe, like the cold was sucking the life out of me. I found the breaker box and flipped the switch, but nothing happened. That's when I heard the breathing. Slow, labored, and right behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but there was no one there. Just an empty space. The breathing continued, louder now, as if whoever, or whatever, it was right next to me. I backed up toward the stairs, trying to keep calm, but my hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the flashlight. As I turned to leave, I heard something else, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like boots on concrete, came from the cold storage above. I didn't wait to find out who, or what, was making them. I bolted up the stairs and out the front door, not stopping until I was sitting in my car with the engine running. I quit the next morning. I couldn't stay there any longer. The pay wasn't worth it. But even after I left, the experience stayed with me. Sometimes, when it's late at night and everything's quiet, I still hear the tapping. It's faint, but it's there. I don't know if it followed me home or if it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. Either way, I can't shake the feeling that something from Hillcrest isn't done with me yet. The Watcher. I never thought I'd end up working at a mortuary, but here I am, doing night shifts for some extra cash. Honestly, it wasn't too bad at first. The dead don't bother you. At least, that's what I used to believe. It started off simple. I was mainly in charge of cleaning up, making sure everything was in order. The building itself was old, like, creepy old. The kind where the walls creak even when there's no wind. But I got used to the noises. What I couldn't get used to were the shadows. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Long shifts, a cold room, and not a lot of company will do that. I'd see something move out of the corner of my eye, just a blur. When I turned to look, nothing was there. I brushed it off. It's just my brain being tired, I told myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, I was finishing up paperwork in the main office, and the lights flickered. Not too weird, right? Old buildings have crappy wiring. I figured I'd just go check the breaker. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the basement. The air down there is always cold, but this time it was freezing. I could see my breath, which was odd because it was the middle of summer. The light from my flashlight danced along the walls, casting long, strange shadows. As I moved closer to the breaker, I noticed something. There were footsteps in the dust on the floor. Now, I know I'm the only one with keys to the place during the night shift. No one should have been down there. The footsteps weren't mine either. They were too big and heading straight into the cold storage room where we kept the bodies. I froze. Every rational part of me screamed to get out of there, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the footprints. When I opened the cold storage room door, it was pitch black inside. I could barely see a thing. As I took a step inside, the temperature dropped even more, and I swear I heard someone breathing. But it wasn't my breath. It was raspy, shallow, like someone struggling for air. I turned my flashlight to the far end of the room. That's when I saw it, a figure, hunched over one of the gurneys. It didn't move like a person, though. It was jittery, twitching like it couldn't quite stay still. The worst part? Its head slowly turned toward me, but I couldn't make out any features. Just darkness where a face should be. I ran. I didn't care if I left the lights flickering, I didn't care if I locked the doors. I just bolted upstairs and sat in my car for what felt like hours. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I quit the next day. No explanations. No 2-week notice. I just left. But here's the thing. Even after leaving, sometimes at night, I still hear that raspy breathing. And I can't shake the feeling that something's watching me, waiting. I don't know if I brought something back from that place or if it just followed me, but I can't get rid of it. I just hope I'm not the only one who's experienced this.